This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I'm with Elle Fricks, and we are joined by Mariko Clark, author of The Book of Belonging. She is a mother and a storyteller, and her time as an editor of National Geographic Learning enabled her to make complex topics accessible and engaging. She and her husband live outside of Indianapolis with their 3 kids. Mariko, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So excited to chat with you guys.
But you're here. I'm so excited. You are here because the Book of Belonging is coming out.
Yay!
Brent can attest to the fact that finding excellent resources for kids can be really challenging. It's one of the top questions that BAMI gets is, how can I try to communicate with my kids the stuff that I've been learning and how important the text is and all of that. And so we're so excited to be able to recommend the Book of Belonging to our listeners. At least I do. Anyway, Elle Fricks certainly does.
I am very excited. We do get this question all the time, and my kids are now 3 and 5. And so I'm in the thick of trying to engage this stuff with my kids as well. So I'm personally experiencing the frustration of how little stuff is out there, and the popular stuff is like, not great. So I'm so excited to have this as a resource. As the episode airs, the book is not quite out yet. But very, very soon, pre-orders are definitely happening. So now is the time. And if you're listening immediately, it will be out soon. And probably most people, it'll just already be ready to order and show up at your doorstep immediately.
Yep. It'll be out September 24th, 2024. And you can pre-order anytime before then.
Perfect. Can you tell us, for folks who don't know, what is the Book of Belonging? What's its story? What drew you to this work? What is it all about?
I would say the elevator pitch is that it's a story Bible, we say, for kind and contemplative kids. It's got a focus on wonder, identity, and then contemplative practices. The story behind it starts with my daughter, actually, my journey as a parent, exactly as you guys were just saying, looking for resources that matched my experience with God and my time as a philosophy and religion editor, and then as a theology nerd with Bema often as what I was nerding out on. And my daughter and I were swimming in the pool one day, and she was 6 at the time. And out of nowhere, she asked me, "Mom, does God love boys more than girls?" Which kind of shocked me to my core, because I had done a lot of work as a parent to lead her to believe not just the opposite, but that would in no way be true. It kind of shocked me. And I asked her, like, why are you asking me that? And she said, well, the story Bible we have at home, we had, just one that someone gifted to us, has only 2, what she called girl stories, and the rest were boy stories, as she called them. And I kind of thought she was exaggerating. As parents were like, yeah. But then I went home and I looked through it, and sure enough, there was the story of, Mary being pregnant with Jesus, and then there was Leah and Rachel, and that was it. And so I'm like, okay, no problem. I'll just get a different one. So like any normal person, I just ordered the top 8 story Bibles on Amazon, and then went through page by page and took stats on a sticky note, as you do.
Excellent.
But as I was flipping through all the stats, it just it was disheartening, and I guess a little surprising, just the female representation in every single Bible that I looked through. It was just 19%, I think, is what I ended up averaging, was 19% of the stories had a female main character. I have my official stats I should have written down somewhere. But it just there was not any female representation where I wanted it to be. And then as I started kind of pulling at that thread, it was like, okay, but I also, while I'm looking, I'd love to look for a story Bible that focuses less on morality and more on the way of Jesus and identity and what God says about who we are. And while I'm at it, I'd love to see a brown Jesus. And while I'm at it, I would love to see this. I'd love to see that. And it finally got to the point where I was like, okay, maybe I should just do it myself. Maybe I should just do the thing that I'm already doing. I had already been taking these stories when I told them to my kids and just sort of, tweaking them a little bit or changing some of the words or including more of the female characters or just, in the case of like Huldah or Hannah or whatever, I'll try to do the pronunciations to make you proud, Elle. I would try to tell them, I kind of had to just spin it out of my head because there wasn't the story to read. I had to tell them, from memory or paraphrase it on my own. So it finally got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself. So we launched on Kickstarter in 2021. It sort of went viral. And then from there, it just has kind of snowballed. We were picked up by a publishing company and they doubled the ask for what we were originally doing. So then doubled our timeline. So we've been working for the past few years to finish. And I actually just got my author copy in the mail on Saturday. So
yay, congratulations.
It's actually happening. Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. So that's kind of the story behind how we got to where we are, the Book of Belonging.
The stats on your website say the following: 7% of stories with a female main character, 19% only have a female character mentioned, and then 23 pages, I'm talking about artwork, have a female person depicted, which is pretty unacceptable in my opinion. And it doesn't accurately portray the actual Word of God, right? If it was, if those were similar to what happens in the pages of our scripture, then I'll be like, oh, well, but it's not. So I love that. And along the way, not to briefly make myself the main character here, because I'm totally not, but you did reach out to me when you guys were had your Kickstarter and brought me in to help out, consult, read. I've been so excited in each step of this process, watching you guys put this incredible piece of work together. And I've been so privileged to be able to chip in. But the emails I was getting, folks, are like, do you know about Persian hairstyles from the correct era? These were the questions. Or tell me about Hagar and blah, 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 blah. Very specific, rooted and grounded. This thing is beautiful. Like, it's one thing to have, I really like the text in this one. But, the art doesn't really draw my kid in. I get that. I have that problem sometimes while trying to find resources for my kids, who right now are 18 months and 3 years old. But the Book of Belonging is also gorgeous. So it has these beautiful values. It's rooted in evidence, evidential history, right? And what folks are wearing and different cultural nuggets all the way through. I, of course, was not the only consultant you guys pulled on. You put together a whole little panel that I'd love if you could talk about in just a sec.
Yeah.
It has these beautiful values that we'll also circle back to. But just the storytelling as well is gorgeous. You're such a talented and gifted person to be doing this narrative. It's not just like, oh, well, it wasn't out there, so I guess I'll do it, an Esther type, like, well, I guess I'm the person in this spot. You're super gifted, beautiful writing. I would cry while reading the manuscript, and just the different pieces that you pulled out beyond the representation. It's not, just checking a box. It's really, really beautiful work. So I'm so thankful for it and the work that you and Rachel did putting it together.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Can you tell me about the other folks that you brought on to chip in or lend an ear or lend an eye?
Yeah. When we thought we were launching solely on Kickstarter and that, I was going to sell these for the rest of my life off my personal website, I wasn't super comfortable, especially since we use terms like diversity and representation. I wasn't super comfortable being kind of the only brain on this. Like, I'm a researcher, I'm a nerd. Like, I can do all the work, but it just was like, I want that experiential knowledge. And so we pulled in a whole panel of advisors. We had Elle for Hebrew language and Old Testament stories and like Persian costuming and whatever. Elle was there for it. We had a New Testament advisor. Her name's Jennifer Garcia Bashaw. For those of you who are Bible for Normal People nerds, she's one of their nerds in residence. She did some of our New Testament stuff. We had a womanist theologian. We had a disability theologian, which was incredible. That was probably the area I knew the least about. We learned so much from her. We had, I think I covered all the bases. Yeah, we just had this incredible panel of people who read every word and poured in their wisdom and their insight and their questions and did not pull punches, which I appreciated. I only cried thrice, so that's always a good sign.
No.
When you're getting feedback.
All my crying was happy. Let me be clear.
It's my baby. So I welcome the feedback, but it stung a bit at times, but I think it ultimately made the book a lot stronger. And that's what I wanted going in. So I'm incredibly grateful to the entire panel, but especially you, Elle. You showed up for every single question we had, and we had some crazy questions.
Aww. That's so sweet. Well, sometimes I would be responding to you and then it would get forwarded to the publisher.
It's true.
Like with the Hebrew names. So in each story, it'll give the Hebrew name if folks want to use those with their kids. And then I'll also have the traditional transliterated name so that folks aren't confused, which I think is a beautiful compromise.
Yeah. My 9-year-old has read, it's the 6-year-old from the original story. She's 9 now. She has read some of the stories as I've been working on it, but since I got my author copy on Saturday, she's been flipping through the book sort of day and night. She's a big reader, and she has been having so much fun with that, which was really affirming because, we made that decision as like, it felt like a justice move in a way. Like you and I talked a lot about erasure and stuff.
Right.
But she has been having so much fun with it, learning some of these names. She's like, I didn't even know. And talking about like Yeshua and Jesus. And she just like has really been enjoying the etymology, I guess. And sort of just like, she's a nerd. She gets it from me. So she has been loving every second of that, which was nice to hear because, we had made the move. As adults, we made this decision hoping like, kids will get on board with this. They'll know where we're going. And they absolutely have. It's been really cool.
Right. Or kids who are from a culture where English is not the primary spoken language. And so they might feel themselves more in the story. So that's beautiful too. Does your story with the church or faith, getting through Bema material, any of that play into why or how you decide to put together the Book of Belonging?
Yeah. I grew up with a more fundamentalist background. I grew up in a tradition where women don't lead, they don't work outside the home, they don't teach anyone but children. They have no authority. And so that was my background. And it's been really interesting to see in this process. We hear from a lot of parents who are in this space where they're you may be like either a deconstructive or like a liminal faith space where, they've had kids and it's making them look more closely at their beliefs and the why behind their beliefs. Feeling almost intimidated to have those conversations with their kids because they're recognizing like, okay, maybe some of the stuff that I was told was fact, I actually can be re-examining. But there's there's a lot of pain and tenderness there. I think the process of deconstruction carries a lot of grief with it.
Yeah.
And then so we hear from a lot of parents who are in this space where they're like, I don't want to pass on the hurt and harm that I'm now sort of taking apart.
Reckoning with.
Yeah, reckoning with. And I want to have these conversations with my kids without passing on that hurt. But I also I'm still trying to figure out what I believe. So how do I have these conversations? They feel kind of stuck in a hard place. And I feel it's been very strange and oddly affirming to contend with. I feel uniquely qualified to be having those conversations with these parents because I think the strange gift of growing up the way that I did is that it's almost as if my church experience rejected me as like a spicy, curious, relentlessly question-asking girl growing up in that space. You know, it rejected me before I could even reject it. So my there wasn't belonging for me, to use the term from my book. There wasn't belonging for me in church spaces in the way that I wanted to show up and in what comes so naturally to me, my personality. And so what you would call like a deconstructive process was so liberating and joyful. And there wasn't this pain that a lot of my peers have experienced in that, for them, maybe church was this really affirming and cozy place that, they experienced a lot of social excitement and had people who were pouring into them and affirming who they are. They had this really positive experience. And then to sort of take that apart and start to examine it and reckon with it can be really painful. And for me, like, it wasn't painful. It was exciting. And so I think, or the way that I grew up, because there wasn't that belonging for me, it was always just kind of like me and God doing this thing on our own in what I, for the longest time, thought was just my imagination. And as an adult, I'm like, I was having spiritual experiences on my own. And I like had the gift of being so held and so parented in a way by the Holy Spirit in these private moments that then coming to an age where it was like, oh, this is the real thing. This private thing that I'm experiencing, that's God. This expansive, mysterious warmth, that's God. And this thing over here that's been rejecting me and judging me and this, whatever you want to call it, like I have so much compassion for that space, but like the dogma and the exclusivity, that is small and brittle and fragile, and it's breaking. The older I get and the more expansive my understanding becomes, like it can't be contained in there. And it was such a joy and a liberation to realize like, oh, it doesn't have to. This thing over here that I have known all along, like that is God. And so I think then to like enter into this space with these parents where it's like, no, I actually would love to help you in that space, because for me, it's been this exciting thing. I don't have that trauma. I don't have that grief. Let's talk about it. Like, let's talk about how you can sort of take that apart. Let's talk about these alternative takes on these stories that feel so painful to you. Like, let's talk about it. There's other ways to be reckoning with these stories. There's other theologies there. There's other interpretations that traditionally a lot of us don't hear about until we're in this liminal space digging. And then it's like, oh, there's so much more there. And I love being in that space with other parents. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah. The what if that component was actually added onto the text and wasn't originally in there? And let's see if there's anything life-giving that is in there. And certainly you've done an incredible job bringing that out throughout these stories. You've alluded to these different core concepts that thread throughout the book. Can you talk about what they are and how you narrowed it down to those components that you wanted to really impart to your kiddos?
Something that I say with my kids and with my husband a lot in our family, we talk about how identity informs action, and that the things that we believe about ourselves ultimately trickle down to the way that we behave in the world. I think that's especially true for kids. You know, there's these psychological studies of like the way that we speak over kids before they take a test or something, they will perform to the level that they're described as. So if they say like, they're not going to be able to do this, like they're not quite at this level with their reading, then they perform to the level that's spoken over them. And I think that that's true of a lot of different areas of our lives as adults, but especially as kids, that like what's spoken over us like ultimately affects the way that we show up in the world. And so knowing that and having that be a core tenet of how I parent my kids, going into sort of like this midrash experience of like ingesting these Bible stories and trying to write them down in a way that felt true, I wanted that component for my kids. I wanted them to know, them to have this core understanding of who they are, so that they wouldn't have the experience of someone in a position of authority coming and saying to them like, hey, actually, you don't have belonging here. And what better way to fight back against that sort of exclusivity than to say like, no, I know exactly who I am. I know exactly who God calls me. It's threaded throughout Scripture. And sitting in that space and being able to have the critical thinking skills to combat that type of thing before it even happens, I think is an incredible gift that we can give our kids. So I was trying to figure out like, okay, there's a ton of things that God says about who we are throughout the entire Bible. Like, how am I going to choose just like a handful of them to hand down to kids? So I was reading the story of Jesus being baptized, and John, the the Spirit comes down like a dove, and you hear God's voice saying, "This is my beloved Son in who I am well pleased." Out of that, I took these things that I think it's the things I needed to hear as a kid, and that a lot of kids need to hear, is that you are loved. This is my beloved Son. You are loved. You belong with me. Like, this is my Son in who I am well pleased. And Elle and I had a whole talk about the word pleased. I was like, I don't know, that translation feels icky to me, I think, because it felt like there was a morality bent to it, that like you exist to please your parent, or you exist to, like, your actions will ultimately decide whether or not God is pleased with you. So we landed on the word delightful. So those are, three concepts that we have threaded throughout every story, is that you are beloved, you belong, and you are delightful to God. And honestly, if kids who read the book take nothing else away, if they take those three terms, like, I feel like I've done my job. I feel like that will serve them so well throughout their life.
Yay! I'm so excited. I don't know if I've reiterated that enough times.
Well, and what we haven't really talked about is just how beautiful this book is. The imagery in it is, it's just, and it's a massive book. And I think you said the scope of the book changed when you signed on with the publisher. I assume you mean like length of the book? We
had promised our Kickstarter supporters 140 pages. We had done all the math with the Kickstarter budget we had, and we're like, the most we can afford to print is a 140-page book. And then when we signed with Penguin Random House, they said, hey, most of your competition is up in like the 200 or 300s as far as page count. We're going to need you to hit that. And we're like, okay, so that's double. And it actually was amazing, because I wanted to cover more and just felt constrained by the page count. So it ended up being great. So we ended up with 42 stories, which feels awesome. So yes, 288 pages. Every single one of them is incredibly illustrated by Rachel Eleanor is my illustrator. And she's just, I wish she could be here. She's usually on interviews with me, and she's awesome. She did an incredible job, especially considering the fact she had a baby right smack in the middle of this project. So she was doing a lot of it in a postpartum space, and just a real triumph. Yeah.
Well, I remember seeing the email come through about the cover design and all the iterations and the work that went into just that one element. And obviously the cover is very important, but I see that same level of work throughout the whole book. Like, there's just so much detail, so much richness to it. And my 5-year-old was eating it up. He did have a little bit of feedback though.
Oh yeah.
Like we got to the page of the animals of the land being created, and he's like, what are those things? I was like, I think those are wildebeest. He's like, well, where's the lions? So where's the cheetahs? I was like, I don't know. But then he ended up finding some leopards a couple pages later. So he's pretty satisfied with that.
He's fine with
and
that.
Then a couple more pages. He thought Adam and Eve sitting on the elephant. He thought those were lions. I was like, oh no, those are the people. but he was pretty satisfied with that. And then we get to he scrolled. He kept asking me about who all the different people were, which is fun. But then he gets to the page, which is, what is this? Is this Joseph's story? Something in Egypt.
It's probably Moses.
It's Exodus 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Exodus 1 and 2 story. And he sees the cow, and he's like, what is that? I was like, that's a cow. He's like, a cow's not supposed to be in a restaurant. I was like, well, I don't think that's a restaurant. I think that's Egypt. And he's like, cows aren't supposed to be in Egypt. They're supposed to be on farms.
Wow. Well, so what I'm hearing, Brent, is that so far you have done an inadequate job educating your child about the Near East.
It's just funny, like the 5-year-old perspective of looking at these images and just like pulling things out of it that I never would imagine. And it's just so like, we had, a fun conversation about all this stuff. So the illustrations, like we've talked about these stories, but not with these kinds of illustrations.
Brought to life.
I actually love hearing that, Brent, because I think what Rachel has done such an incredible job of is that they slotted us in sort of like a 7 to 11 age bracket as far as readability. I'm aware that it's probably higher than that. Like my 9-year-old is right there with it, reading it on her own. But I think what Rachel's done such a good job of is making the illustrations so interactive and engaging that younger kids, even if the language is above their head, they are right there. Like there's so much to look at on every single page. And Rachel does such a great job of even capturing emotions on these characters' faces. My kids they're all feelers. We got a family full of feelers, and they're all on every single page like, well, why is he upset? Why does she look sad? Why does he look confused? And it's really, really nice because then you can sort of dig into the story and dig into sort of that Ignatian practice of putting yourself in the character's shoes and how were they experiencing God? How were they experiencing this circumstance in their life? And it's like, yeah, she does look really scared. Have you ever felt really scared? How did you feel like God was with you in that? And it creates these really sweet spiritual formation moments just from the pictures. I'm like, Rachel, you've done it. You've done it.
It's incredible.
The density of these illustrations, like there's so much to look at, so much to see, so many details to pull out. Yeah, I'm excited to see this thing in person because it's so beautiful just even on the computer screen. Like I can only imagine how amazing the physical book is.
Full page too.
Yeah.
I circling back to the emotional depictions of the characters. It just like, it gets my heart just even seeing characters like I could have on my wall the depiction of Sarah angrily stirring her pot because so often female characters in these texts are portrayed in a very specific way and which are infused with historical and cultural Christian ideas. And even in our translations, so often women's anger is edited out. Like it says that Hannah is really angry when she's praying, and our translations change that to sad because we're more comfortable with that, apparently. But so just seeing that, and right after that, also, it's not just like, oh, look how powerful Sarah is because she's angry. It's not that. In the next page, it shows her fully pregnant, which is another beautiful thing. There's pregnant people, nursing women all through this text. This brings me joy. And she's also, the little caption on it says, is this too good to be true? So showing the complexity of emotion, it's not just like, oh, well, Sarah's an angry person, showing that different people experience all sorts of complicated, complex emotions at the same time. And it just is gorgeous. There's people who, they're not just brown, right? They look like they're from the areas that they're from, and that's beautiful as well. And all of that hair, all of the detail. It's just so life-giving to me. And I'm so excited for my kids to be like, oh yeah, that's what so-and-so looks like.
Yeah.
Checks the box. So thank you for putting in all of this work, you and Rachel together.
I will pass that on to her because she worked so hard for that. And it's sort of, when we're talking about things that I was looking for in a story Bible, then I think a lot of my peers are looking for, a lot of parents we talk to, that emotional complexity is a huge part of it. Because I think a lot of us are parenting, especially when it comes to emotions, a lot differently than how we were parented.
Right.
The idea that sometimes my kids will look at any sort of story or any show and it's like, is he a good guy or a bad guy? Are they good or are they bad? Based on, a lot of times if it's a villain, it's like their eyebrows go this way.
Right.
But if they're not a villain, their eyebrows go this way. And so they're looking at these pictures like, is that person good or bad? And it's like, well, that's not really the question we want you to be asking. So when we give them that complexity of emotion, it's like actually every single person feels angry. Their eyebrows are going down, not because they're bad, because they're angry. And actually, like, let's talk about anger. Like sometimes anger comes out when you're really sad. Sometimes, and we have a lot of language about it in the mindful moments or even in the stories of like anger. All of our emotions are a gift. Like my kids just saw Inside Out 2 last night. And so now they're coming home. They want to talk about like all the feelings that are in them. And I think that that's the gift that we're giving them is like, these Bible characters were just as complex as we are. And when we flatten them down to those sort of like one-dimensional, like all girls are happy and any Enneagram 2s who are happy to just like bring you your food and like that's what a Christian woman is. Like that's doing these characters a disservice, but it's also doing our kids a disservice of like that's not how people operate.
Right.
And it's not so what's that word?
Black and white.
Black and white, or like can't remember. It doesn't matter. But yes, that's exactly what we're trying to get to. And I think Rachel's done a great job of showing that complexity and contending with it in a way that is not sorting people into two categories, but showing that is a normal and God-given way to react to life's circumstances, and that God holds us no matter what our emotion is. Like, we still have our belonging, we're still beloved, and we're still delightful no matter what feeling we're feeling. And I think that's really comforting for kids to hear as they're learning to regulate.
Yes. Good, better coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
The Sarah quote, "Is this too good to be true?" Like, absolutely something my wife has said during our pregnancies.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So like just the reality of that. And my wife was looking at the Esther story last night, and the whole part with Vashti, and like what must the people in the room have been saying to her? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, we don't know.
Yeah.
But I think we can pretty accurately imagine. And she felt particularly seen just in that little, side moment.
Yeah.
In that story as well. So there's just so much reality brought into it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. The Esther one is one of my favorites. It's so, for the people who can't see the book right now, Rachel drew Esther as a graphic novel. And we were sort of trying to nod to the fact that, like, Esther, and you guys can give more legs to this, I get, but the idea of Esther as being a story that God's people in captivity were telling this story sort of as an illustration of, like, how do we live in a place where we don't quite belong? Like, do we assimilate? How do we keep our devotion and our assimilation? How do we balance that? And so we sort of have this like little introduction about like captivity, and then sort of like, here's how people comforted themselves. And then it becomes this graphic novel, and then we sort of fade out. But one of my favorite parts is that, as you know, the story of Esther is the only book in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned. And so we're like, okay, how do we draw this and set it up for kids in a way that fits with the value that every story we wanted to ask ourselves, like, what does this story teach us about who God is? Like, it's not about the characters and like the moral at the end of the story that the characters learn some sort of lesson and now you apply it to your life too. We didn't want that sort of traditional take on Bible storytelling. We wanted it to be like, what does this teach you about God's character and what God is like? But also, what does it teach you about who God says that you are, as you're seeing this person who is just as human as you are, contending with circumstances that you likely will have some sort of similar circumstance. And so we were like, well, how do we talk about God in a story that's God's not mentioned? And so one of the Easter eggs, and I'm sure there's people who are uncomfortable with this, but Rachel has a cat. If you look through, there's this little Easter egg throughout. She has this little cat who's kind of like peeking around Mordecai and then around Esther, and is sort of like in these intense moments throughout the story, you see this little cat. And then at the end, we have this mindful practice, sort of like a modified examine, this Ignatian practice where you think back over your day. So we were having kids hold a cup of tea and think back through their day and like, where did you feel like you saw God? Where did you feel like you were alone? Where do you think this? How do you feel God reacted to that? And Rachel has this really cool drawing of like this cup of tea, and there's the cat, and then there's Esther, and there's the steam in the shape of God. And it's like, I think it says something like search for God, or like.
It does. Yeah, I'm looking at it. Mm-hmm.
And that was one of my favorite things, because once I told my 9-year-old about that, she's like, wait, what? And so then she kind of went on this hunt through the story looking for the cat. And I made sure to be like, we're clear that God's not a cat, right? Like, you hear me on this, right? But sort of just the theme there of like, you kind of can go back through your day. And even when you felt alone, like, well, where was God showing up? How did that feel? What do you know to be true? What do you know to not be true? So
that's so cool. I love that you have embedded in throughout the book these opportunities to do spiritual formation. You have them labeled either mindful moments or wonder moments.
Yeah,
it's such a great opportunity when I'm reading to my 3-year-old, mostly because the 18-year-old is just going to be pointing at the cat and yelling, "Cat!"
Well, and based on my experience in Israel and Turkey, not surprising that there would be a cat hanging around anyway. So
yes, that's certainly true. But the giving parents a script to be able to take it beyond, like, these are the stories in the book, and this book is important to us because it's central to our faith. So yep, the end.
Yeah.
Being able to take it into this second dimension with them, keeping it personal, talking about sometimes you won't always know exactly where God was in that moment in your life. But if you do the work and go back with the help of the Spirit, you should be able to find it. It's really beautiful and really, really helpful. Do your kiddos have any favorites in here? Did you take anything from your regular parenting and discipling of your kids and put it into the book?
Something that I think about a lot as a somewhat anxious person is my kids getting older and getting to that point where I think a lot of us were like 80s and 90s babies. I don't know if you guys experience this. You reach a certain age and people start talking about making your faith your own. It was like this thing where it's like, oh, it's time to make your faith your own. And at least in my tradition, that involved a lot of apologetics. It's like, hey, let's just make sure you have all of this dogma down pat. Like, let's make sure you've memorized it so that when you get out there into the big bad world and you start being challenged, that you'll be able to defend what you have learned.
Right.
And when you think about it, though, that's not making your faith your own. There's absolutely no like personal involvement when you do that. There's memorization.
Sure.
But then when you are challenged, if your defense doesn't stack up, if the way you memorized it doesn't exactly fight back on the argument,
right,
then you're kind of just like, that's when things start to shatter. So if we want to give our kids or guide them into a lifelong faith, it has to be more than just memorizing what they've been taught. And I think the best way to do that a lot of times is to make them comfortable with wonder and with mystery and with this sense of, I don't know. Like, they have to be able to look at something, ask questions of it in a way that feels not threatening, and to be able to come out on the other side with either an answer or sometimes no answer at all, and to be able to say, I don't know, actually. And no one seems to know. There's a lot of opinions, but isn't that so wonderful that we serve a God who doesn't fit into our brain space? Like,
right,
that is actually ideal, that we can't completely comprehend this being that we're worshiping, because otherwise, like, that's not great news for us, that it's like fits right into our human heads. So the wonder moments sort of came out of that desire for my kids, that I'm like, I want them to have critical thinking, and I want them to, when they reach the phase where they're asking questions of this, that the questions are already so normalized and welcome that it doesn't shatter when they examine it. And then the mindful moments are, I think a lot of us are dealing with this now, where we're in a time where our kids, we have to be so intentional about giving them solitude, silence, and stillness. There's so much busyness, all the technology, all of the input that they're getting constantly every single day. We actually have to go out of our way, at least in this family, to carve out time for them to be bored, time for them to wonder, time for them to reflect, time for them to just sit and think about what they believe, or sit and have experiences with God, or sit and learn to hear God's voice and to feel the Spirit. And if we don't carve that out for them, then they won't have it, I don't think, in this day and age. No kid is going to be like, hey, I'm going to go spend some time out in the woods and just
right,
think about my life.
Right.
So the mindful moments are more, I have found contemplative practices, especially Ignatian practices, to be so healing and grounding for me. And it sort of just trickled down into the writing of this book. So the mindful moments are more reflective, contemplative. Some of them are embodied, like we'll have a kid go sit outside and look at the trees and think about the wind, and if the words for spirit also mean wind, well, what does that mean, and how does it move the trees, and is it invisible, like that sort of thing, to sort of just create those mindful moments at the end of some of the other stories. Yeah,
I'm so delighted with both of those concepts. I love the idea that being comfortable with mystery is something that makes you resilient and gives a more robust faith, right?
Yeah.
I was raised similarly to you, where like I need to be able to describe soteriology, actually the whole systematic theology outline.
Yep.
And that is what faith means.
Yep.
And again, you're correct that if you ever have an answer that doesn't seem to fit, or a question that doesn't quite track with like, wait, but it doesn't seem like 1 + 1 = this anymore, then you're just like, well, I guess nothing's true. You know?
Yep. Yeah.
And that's the experience of it, seems like a lot of folks. So teaching kids that that's okay. And I think that's also, even though of course we're still invited to seek truth and pursue who God is, and it's not just supposed to be a giant like, who knows, it's all fine. It's never God's requirement for people to get everything down right. Shimshon, Samson's parents, in the book of Judges, an angel comes to them, and it's a really cute story, the two of them together. It's a great marriage partnership story, trying to figure out what is going going on. And they spend the whole story being like, is it an angel? Is it God? If it is, why aren't we dead? Because we're not supposed to see God. Would God have killed us? And the angel is just focused on getting them to walk this path because Samson's going to be a Nazirite, a Nazir. And so he's telling Samson's mom, make sure you don't have wine, make sure XYZ. And so I think that it's really rooted in the text to feel like that's not God's number one priority all the time. It's like figure out everything that there is to know. It's also about relationship. It's also about trust. It's also about walking the path. And so I love that you've built that into a practice.
Yeah.
And that it's not that the answer to an overly rigorous outline is nothing. Right? It's not like, oh, well, mystery is part of our faith, and so we don't do spiritual disciplines. It's like, no, mystery is a spiritual discipline. Let's do it together. So I love that. And then with the mindful moments, I love that it's a specific, concrete answer to what you're just talking about, that so many parents are wrestling with, like, what do I do about screen time? All of these studies are coming out about kids' anxiety and how all of this is so bad for their brains, and not a lot of answers out there that feel tangible for people other than take their phones away. And so instead saying here is something physical and literal that you can do with your kids and you can model with them, right?
Yeah.
Which is a great invitation for parents too, for people who haven't explored silence as a practice. Jesus did. Jesus went out in the wilderness and sat on the hill. So if that's too woo-woo for you, then I guess Jesus is too woo-woo. Repent.
So true.
So thank you so much for building that into the book. It's a huge gift. I think last question that I have anyway, you've talked a lot about how this book came together in conversation with experts, but also with parents and with peers, and what we're trying to figure out, pilot our kids, pilot our lives as we try to walk this path together. Is there anything, any one thing you could say, okay, this is what I hope is the takeaway for this generation of parents or for the church, for Christianity? What is the one thing that you hope that people get a hold of, perhaps through the work that you've put in for the past few years?
I think it is sort of what we discussed about the identity, or like the naming component of, if we can speak over kids that they are loved by God, that from the beginning, and I think Marty describes it early in one of the earlier seasons about like a Genesis 1 mindset as opposed to a Genesis 3 mindset of like, you were created and called very good from the get-go, like from the jump. God was delighted by you, I think is so, like, every kid needs to hear that. Like, kids just want to be filled up, right? Like, we got to fill their cup, and telling them they are loved and they belong and that they are delightful every single day. I tell them until they believe it. Like, I think it does. It creates that resilience that no matter what circumstance they're going to face in life, no matter what, theology they're challenged with, or some leader who might fail them at some point, that I think a lot of our peers are dealing with that. It's like, it won't shatter if that's what's at the core of like who God says you are. If you fully believe that, then you're going to live up to that truth. And if you believe that about other people too, like you're going to treat them with that mindset. Like if we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, if you believe that your neighbor is beloved of God, is delightful to God, and belongs with God, then your posture towards them is going to reflect that. And I think that we're giving our kids that gift too of believing that is true of other people, and assuming good intent, I think, is such a gift, especially the way things can be these days. People are polarized, they're in their camps, and it's difficult to have that posture of assuming good intent sometimes.
I am curious if there's a particular story in the book that was more challenging than the others to write, or one that you had to try like several times to get it to the point. Like what's the part? I mean, I don't know. I love the story that you have as a kid, like just this, what you thought was your imagination, but all these spiritual experiences between you and God. I don't know, like you do have that same fundamentalist background that I had, but maybe a different perspective of God because of your own spiritual imaginations. So I'm wondering, like, what are the stories that are a struggle for you?
Maybe this isn't quite what you're... so many of them were a struggle for me. Two stand out, one Old Testament, one New. Old Testament writing, I knew I wanted to tell the story of Hagar. Like, that was really important. Or the woman called Hagar. I know that's not her name. That was really important to me to tell her story. But I knew that in order to tell her story, I had to talk about Abraham and Sarah in a way that set up her story, but they're sort of the villains in her story. But to then also tell their story from a place of compassion and understanding. Like, if I'm going to talk the talk, I have to walk the walk. That, like, if every single human is beloved and belonging and delightful to God, and if their behavior is an outpouring of what they believe about themselves, then how do I tell the story of a villain and then tell the story of a victim in a way that honors them both in their journey with God and learning God's wisdom? That was the real struggle. And I think some of it is cultural that, did you guys watch Ted Lasso at all?
Oh, yes.
Except for the last few episodes of the last season.
Okay. So Ted Lasso, I had heard this story that what made some of their storytelling so compelling was that traditionally, it's a trope in Hollywood that any two female protagonists will be enemies.
Sure.
They were setting up, let's see if I can remember her names. Keely, and I think her name's Rebecca. These two protagonists. At the beginning, you thought they were sailing towards being enemies, right? And then they have this moment in the bathroom where they meet and they end up becoming allies in this like beautiful friendship throughout the series. And that was because they had committed in Ted Lasso to have, I think it was at least 50% of their writers be women. And the women in this writer's room were speaking up and being like, hey, actually, that's not really how it works in real life. Like, women don't meet each other and immediately see each other as competition or as enemies. That's something that has been birthed out of like the male gaze for sure. And so that sort of happened, I think, with Hagar and Sarah, that like there was a victim and a villain dynamic for sure. But like, Elle, you even helped me with some of the language of like, but they were both full humans having a full experience, and we can't reduce them to those two identities. But keeping that balance of affirming Hagar in that like something horrifying happened to you, and then you ultimately had this beautiful moment of being the first person in Scripture to name God. Like that I wanted to honor, but at the same time talk about how horrifying it is that Sarah goes from being oppressed in a very specific way to oppressing someone else in that same specific way.
Right.
That was really hard, I think, to be like, I don't want to fall into the trope of painting these two women as enemies, but I also want to honor the very specific dynamic that's going on here. That was really tricky. That one was hard to write as a woman.
But also how important, because so many of us you take the same pain that we experience and then force it onto other people. And so depicting that, but like you just said earlier with your kiddos being like, there isn't a bad guy and a good guy here, even though one person is clearly in the wrong. So thank you for doing all of that work.
And for giving Hagar the story in the book, because I think, if you just ask somebody like, who's the main character here? Oh, it's Sarah. Well, how much do we know about Hagar? Well, maybe not so much. It's like, actually, we do know quite a bit. She gets quite a bit of text about her story. And so it's like, yeah, good to actually utilize that and, trying to pick through all of this stuff and figure out what you're going to share. I think that was a good choice to include her story like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really had to fight for her. I leaned pretty heavily on Wilda Gaffney's work in some of the Old Testament stories. She's a womanist theologian, and she spends a fair bit of time on Hagar in her book, Womanist Midrash. And it was the first time I had really heard that character in any sort of like three-dimensional description. And I'm like, oh, that's strange. And I went to some of my other commentaries and research books, and it's like there's one line, and it's almost always just like, flattening her to one dimension, or just like incredibly derogatory. Like some of the words that Martin Luther has written about Hagar, like really intense, just awful stuff. And it's like, when it's not like she was sort of like this gray area character and he kind of took it in one, like she's very, very obviously the victim in the story. No matter how you slice it, she got the short end of the stick. And it was shocking to me that there was like almost no other information, and at least in like, the 60 books on my bookshelf besides like, one sentence about her. So I really had to fight for her inclusion, especially I think after that I was so much more committed that I'm like, oh my gosh, this woman's story needs to be told, because there's that beautiful interplay too between the fact that like we don't actually know what her real name was, that they called her this name.
Right.
And I think, Elle, I've heard in some of your commentary that you would translate it as guest. Is that right? Or
yeah.
Go ahead.
The ha part means that's the definite article in Hebrew, and then gar is the word for resident or guest. It's how Abraham talks about himself as he's being a nomad. And so here he has this opportunity. Well, how would you like to be received? What would your hospitality like to be like? And then how does he give it to this probably Egyptian woman who was probably given to him when he was staying in Mitzrayim in Egypt. So yeah, that's a little parentheses background.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think, I was talking about the interplay between like, she is this character who spends this whole narrative, like you said, Brent, she has a good amount of like screen time, quote unquote, in the stories, and yet remains unnamed throughout it. And then has like at the end of her story ends up naming God. I was so intrigued by that, that theme of naming, and that I just couldn't ignore her. So I had to include her. So that was the Old Testament story. That was really hard. And then New Testament, writing the crucifixion was a battle for me. I think coming out of like a very hyper-Calvinist fundamentalist background, trying to write it with atonement theory, with a variety of atonement theory, or a more expansive atonement theory beyond penal substitutionary atonement. And I know you've covered that in other episodes. That was a real challenge, especially knowing that I, to my knowledge, am the first story Bible author to diverge from strictly penal substitutionary atonement.
Sure.
So that was a real battle to fight for it. And contend with all of the different theories and try to create what I felt like would be expansive and to honor a lot of different atonement theories and traditions, but, also to tell a story in a linear narrative way while also
for children, by the way.
For children, yeah, no big deal.
Like, have fun writing an essay that incorporates all the atonement theories, but now make it for kids.
Make it fun and cute.
And it has to be, X amount of words long. It can't be 20 pages. It has to be, right.
Exactly.
And evocative to kids.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, the use of color in the illustrations in particular in that portion of the book, I think is really, really powerful as well. So just another shout out to Rachel on that one. Again,
yeah, Rachel really, she did the work. I mean, she does such a good job, I think, with those scenes that they're darker, but they don't feel ominous or oppressive, because I think kids can be spooked pretty easily, at least my kids, when it feels like they're like, oh no,
yeah, is
a bad guy coming, or like something bad's going to happen. It's like in a movie when your kids hear like the theme music and they're all just like lean back, they know something's coming. So I think Rachel did such a good job in some of the scenes that required either like the cover of darkness or even just like a nod to like, this was a pretty dark thing that was happening, without making it like feel like a horror story. She's got those like deep purples and then the candlelight. I'm amazed by that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so many textures and like, all of the fine details that make it work the way that it does.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. I've said it so many times throughout, but it's a huge gift to me. And I'm so sure to so many other families. So thank you for believing in this work and going through the month after month and, it's going to be longer. Persevering and putting together something beautiful, putting together something which we can raise our kids with and just enjoy as we work on discipling them and cultivating their faith alongside our own. So thank you again.
Thanks, Elle. I appreciate that.
Yeah, Mariko, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this work. I'm so excited for people to get copies. I hope that you sell like just 1 million copies. Like,
yes, amen.
I love the story of like, the only kids Bible that doesn't have strictly PSA. It's like, that jives with my experience. I feel like I've not done as much research as you have. It sounds like you did a lot of research. You looked at a lot of books. So I'm like, wow, because it is pretty limited in what is out there. So to have something that is different and so colorful and beautiful, I'm just super excited.
I do feel like I have to put a little asterisk on that. There have been a handful of story Bibles that have come out in the process of me writing the Book of Belonging that I have heard wonderful things about. I just haven't, had the time to do my full, sticky note stat taking.
I've still been buying stuff and reading stuff in the meantime. And let me tell you, I'm still doing editing, especially when we get to the crucifixion and et cetera. It's like, and then let me do some improv real
exactly.
fast. So yes, this is a treasure. Thank you for your courage and thank you for your hard work and perseverance.
Well, and may it be the beginning of a new era of beautiful, wider ranging, more diverse children's Bibles that tell the stories in more ways than the one narrow way that we're used to.
Yes.
Amen. Amen.
Would love that.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And anyone can go to BamaDeception.com. We'll have a link to the book in the show notes to pre-order or to buy, depending on how quickly people are listening to this. Get a copy because, it's gorgeous. Mariko, do you have a website that we should point people to specifically in case they're curious what you do next?
So there's a couple different things we could do. Rachel and I have a Substack where we send out, right now it's sort of like sneak peeks and behind the scenes about the making of the book. That's mostly what we've been covering. So it would be substack.com/thebookofbelonging. Or thebookofbelonging.com is our website where you can just learn more about some of our core values and about Rachel and I, and you can sign up for the Substack there. So that might be the best place to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, all of those things will be in the show notes. All of that at BamaDeception.com. So check those out. And thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.